Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and tonight I want to talk about my own story again and some of my personal experiences on the magical and esoteric spiritual path. You know, I've talked a little bit about my story before. Those videos seem to be popular with people. You know, things that have happened to me that have confirmed the reality of certain spiritual things, certain experiences that I've had, doing certain exercises, reaching certain levels of consciousness, or just kind of phenomena that I've experienced, to tell you a little bit about me and what has formed my views of esoteric spirituality. And I'm going to do that again tonight. And you know, I've got a playlist about my story, but it's really like a patchwork of different stories from different points in my life. It's not always obvious how they connect to each other, and it's not always obvious to me how certain experiences connect with each other. But I was recently able to connect the dots between my interest in Enochian magic and some very early spiritual experiences that I had, some of the earliest spiritual experiences that I had, and how that inadvertently led me to Enochian magic later in life. And this was very surprising for me to discover or rediscover. And there's some fascinating experiences in there for me to recount. So I think that you'll really enjoy this video and some of the topics that it explores. So here are the early visionary experiences, you might say, which later led me to Enochian magic. And the significance of considering where we're being led by the experiences in our life and the synchronicities in our life. That will be a major theme of this video. You know, I recently have been thinking about the dissolution of the ego and that kind of step on the spiritual path. It has occupied a lot of my time in the last few months, understanding that process, for reasons that I'll go into in subsequent videos. But I kind of realized something important. I realized that, you know, when we talk about dissolving the ego, what people kind of imagine is like you get rid of your entire personality and there's just a vacuum left behind and you become like a blank slate, you know, like a brainwashed member of a cult. But that's not really what happens when you dissolve the ego. See, I think I've spoken about this in other videos, but there's a distinction between the false personality of the ego and our true authentic personality. Because we don't organically exist in a state of nothingness. We don't naturally exist in a state of nothingness. There's a lot that goes into us. There's our, you know, the sort of genes that we carry. There's the life experiences that we've had, the environments that we've grown up in, the karma that we inherit, even from previous lives, if you prescribe to belief in reincarnation, what nation we belong to, and so forth, what time we are in and what the big pressing issues of that time are, and so forth. All of these things influence who we are as a person in a way that we cannot help. But we feel a certain tendency towards things in life because of the makeup of who we are. And it's not necessarily something that we choose, but it is the thing that is right for us just by nature. And so there's like an authentic version of ourselves that we can find underneath all of the other conditioning that we have. And we can start to realize that what the ego really is, it's not the personality per se, but it's a distortion of our true self, of our true personality. And, you know, we had natural tendencies, natural inclinations, which was the truth of our nature, which somewhere along the line got distorted and twisted up or exaggerated in some way, and that's what creates the ego. And the process of dissolving the ego is undoing that distortion and returning to pure authenticity, rather than just not having a personality at all. And so that's what I've come to realize, and I've also come to realize in the process of introspection that I've been going through recently, that for as long as I can remember, I've always felt as though there was something greater than me that had laid out a certain plan for me to follow and at certain times in my life was calling me to discover that plan and disregard my own plans of what I wanted my life to be and follow that instead. And I've spent much of my life, and indeed my spiritual life, trying to understand what that is. And there are a lot of things in my life spiritually that I've been guided to over the years. And I've recently been doing an exercise where I have been thinking about all the things in my life, all the synchronicities in my life that were leading me somewhere, and only taking account of those things and disregarding all of the other ambitions or hopes or dreams that I might have had, and only following that, and not necessarily knowing exactly where it's going to lead in the future, but just following that and seeing where that leads me. And I think now that I'm beginning to fully understand what that picture looks like. And I was, amazed to find doing that exercise that a lot of the important, pivotal spiritual experiences of my life were all things that I was led to. But there was one exception where I couldn't find an obvious link to synchronicities in my past that had led me to it. And that was me taking up the practice of Enochian magic and taking it up very enthusiastically. For a long time, I couldn't see a connection with my past experiences, past synchronicities that I'd experienced. And then I thought about it some more, and I realized actually there was quite a bit that was almost priming me for finding and being attracted to Enochian magic later in life. And that was some of my very earliest spiritual experiences as a 13, 14-year-old. So if you've seen my video about the light beings, you'll know that I had quite vivid dreams when I was younger, and I used to get messages in my dreams. This began probably in earnest around 11 or 12 years old. But by the time I was 13, I was receiving a lot of information this way and a lot of hints about, where the divine wanted me to go in life. And there were also other little kind of synchronicities and things like that I followed, which were leading me towards certain information. And I've spoken before about when I was 13 years old, I had my first past life experience, my first past life memory, and the synchronicities surrounding that, where I realized the importance of a spiritual figure known as Thoth, and who had been my master in a previous life, and whose teachings I now had to rediscover. Well, around the same time that was happening, there were some other interesting things that were happening in my inner world. For one thing, I had a particular dream about an archaeologist in Egypt who discovered something underneath the Sphinx, discovered some hidden kind of passageways or some hidden rooms underneath the Sphinx. And then within those hidden chambers, there was a series of tablets which had writing on them in an alien language, an unknown language, an alphabet that nobody had seen before. And this was before I knew anything about Edgar Cayce and his kind of visions about there being secret underground tunnels under the Sphinx or anything like that, or that there might be knowledge in there. I later learnt, as I connected to Thoth in around the same period in my life, about the halls of Amenti and the idea that indeed Thoth had put hidden information somewhere underneath the Sphinx in hidden passageways that was waiting to be rediscovered. And there's been a bit more interest in recent times about stuff happening underneath the pyramids and underneath the Sphinx, but I'm going to leave that to one side for now. But these tablets, I could kind of recall some of the symbols that were on them, and I sort of recreated it. And it's a very unique kind of language. It looks very similar. It doesn't look like any earth language, but it does look very similar to light languages. If you've ever seen what a light language looks like, this is the sort of thing that star seeds and people like that claim to channel, which is like an extraterrestrial alphabet. It kind of looks similar to that. And so, you know, I had this language, and because of the other spiritual experiences that I had, and being led to this connection with Thoth, and the idea of Thoth bringing knowledge with him that was hidden in underground tunnels in Egypt, I understood that the tablet that I saw was supposed to be written by Thoth. It was some kind of hidden book of Thoth, which, you know, I found out even later is a thing as well. So already I was being led towards the figure of Thoth, who existed before the flood in Atlantean times, you know, as the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean claim, which is one of the things I was led to. And he wrote in this sort of prehistoric language of mysterious symbols, and he had these books of knowledge that were written in this language that were now lost. This sounds very similar to the backstory of Enochian magic, and how it was transmitted in the form of this mysterious language, which had an alphabet, which looked very kind of unique and even alien, and that this was said to be the language spoken by the prophet Enoch, and that before the flood, Enoch received a bunch of knowledge from his visionary experiences ascending into heaven, which he wrote down, and that was a source of knowledge to humanity that was lost. And so this is very similar to the story of Thoth, almost like the same story retold. And in fact, there were some rabbis who believed that Hermes, or Thoth, was the same figure as Enoch because of this similarity. And so already I was being primed to look towards this antediluvian knowledge, and knowledge delivered and transmitted in this mysterious language from that time, that legendary or mythical time. And it was important for me to follow that line of inquiry. There was another experience as well, which was kind of subtly leading me towards Enochian magic in my childhood. And that was another dream that I had, where I had a dream about 3 suns rising on the horizon, and they were all different sizes. Some were bigger, some were smaller. And then as I saw the 3 suns rising together, there were like these chariots with these sort of ancient robed figures on them. 3 robed figures sort of descending down from heaven, from the clouds, in these flying chariots. And they were speaking this mysterious language, which to me sounded like a cross between ancient Egyptian and perhaps Latin. And I kind of intuitively knew that this was meant to represent the Atlantean language. Again, another kind of form of what the antediluvian language might have been. My mind trying to understand what that might have been like and leading me towards that. And I was recently going through some of my old papers. You know, I've been going through a lot of my old stuff recently, getting rid of things that don't matter to me so much anymore. And I've rediscovered a lot of old things as well. And one of the things that I rediscovered relatively recently was that when I first discovered Enochian magic and the Enochian language when I was 17, one of the first things that I had done, which I later forgot about for some reason, was think that the Enochian language and how it sounded when it was spoken sounded very similar to this language that I had heard in my dream, where I'd seen the figures descending down on the chariots from heaven. And I actually tried to use an Enochian dictionary that was at the back of one of my first books on the topic to translate some of the language that I could remember. And I didn't get very far. And I didn't really remember words in that language except for like how it vaguely sounded. But this again seemed to be pointing me towards Enochian, and the fact that it resonated with these earlier experiences that I'd had, both in terms of the alphabet and the language itself as it's spoken, and some of the origin story of it, all of that kind of really resonated with my earlier experiences as a child and what it was leading me towards and what the divine wanted me to discover. And so when I did start to explore the mysteries, that in particular was one form of magic that I really delved into. So this has all led me to the conclusion that Enochian magic, like other things in my spiritual life, is something that I've ultimately been led to by a higher power that I was meant to discover. And so it's helped me to understand that it's really something I'm meant to do as part of my path. And what has been really fascinating to discover is this connection potentially between Enochian magic and all of the legends and myths about Atlantis and the lost knowledge of Atlantis, which is still something I'm trying to wrap my head around. But it's really interesting how when you look back in the past and you follow things to the very end, the connections that you can find and the true origins of things that you can find. And, you know, if you've enjoyed this video, I encourage you to think about the synchronicities in your own life, the dreams and perhaps even visionary experiences you've had in your own life, and the ones that felt genuine. Where were they leading you? And you might then discover what your true will is. Behind all of the ego and all of the performances that we put on for the mundane world. And if you too are interested in Enochian magic, I want to give a plug to EnochaCon. It's a fantastic conference on Enochian magic that's happening in July. And I will leave the details of that in the description of this video if you're interested in signing up to go to EnochaCon. I'm actually going to be speaking there myself, giving an online presentation, almost all, in my opinion, of the most important figures who have something to say about Enochian magic today will be presenting at that conference. So if that's something that you're into, EnochaCon, go check it out. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to this channel to support my work. And if you want to support me further, please hit join to become a member, or thanks to give me some extra support that way. And you can find those buttons down below. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.